I'm Wendy Kennedy, and I am a channel for the Ninth Dimensional Pleiadian Collective. You know, as a child, I didn't really have any gifts that I was really aware of. I was always very curious about UFOs and ETs and the paranormal. I can remember in school you would get those little booklets, and you could choose your books to order through the school, and I would always choose the ones on ghosts and UFOs. But my gifts didn't really come to life until I was in my early mid-20s. And I started having visions, and I didn't know what they were. And so as I started to explore that, I came across channeling, and I knew it was something I was supposed to be doing. I didn't know anyone who did it. I didn't really even know what it was. But I just had this very strong feeling within myself that I was supposed to be doing it. My family's very intuitive. My brother is also quite sensitive and intuitive. Apparently my great-grandmother had tarot cards and crystal balls and things like that, but you know, I don't know of anyone in my family really having any psychic abilities. Well, I studied theater and film in school, and if I look back now, I think things started to surface then. It was such an amazing space for me to kind of explore myself. Being in that environment, I was exposed to yoga and breathing and all different kinds of things that dealt with the body and movement that helped to open me up and prepare me for channeling. And you know, I never would have thought that this is what I would be doing 25 years later, but it was such a great training ground for me. And then when I started, I was taking meditation classes and doing work on myself.
Was there a voice that came to you?
No. For me, it was just this drive from inside. And when I first started to channel, I was trying to do it verbally. But for me, I would have a very visceral response. My eyes would flutter and water, and then my hands would tingle, but I couldn't get the words out. And so when I would practice, this would happen all the time, but I just wasn't getting any clear message. So I would put it aside, and I'd come back to it a couple months later, and in the interim I was doing work on myself. And you know, finally one day I sat down, and I knew I was supposed to have a pen and paper, and I started doing automatic writing. So my angelic guides came in first, and then more galactic beings started showing up. And after about 9 months or so, I was hearing the words well in advance of what I was writing. And the guide said, it's time to put down the pen and paper and channel verbally. And once I did that, that's when the Ninth Dimensional Pleiadian Collective showed up, because they were waiting for me to channel verbally because they work with tone and sound. So, you know, anymore, they're the first ones to come through. Their dialect sounds different than my own, but it's not any one particular dialect. It's just tones and sounds that they can modulate to help resonate with you at a cellular level. And it's changed over the years depending on what the groups have needed. So the dialect itself, at one point it sounded far more British, and then it went to this Australian place, and it used a whole new set of muscles that was very difficult for me during that period. And then right now it's kind of somewhere in the middle, but it changes based on what we need and the frequencies we need.
What books were influencing you at the time? Was there anything that you was coming across, any channel material?
You know, there were the Seth books, but I would start them, but I think at the time they were probably too advanced for me. I just couldn't grasp some of the concepts yet. I did read Sneha Roman's Opening to Channel. That was one of the books I had. The other was a very small book with meditations, and for the life of me, I can't find it now. But it was, that small little book was my primary book. There was Jalila Starr, who was out there doing her thing along with Barbara Marciniak. That came a little bit later for me, the exposure to the Pleiadians. I was actually living in Chicago at the time. I was pursuing my acting career and doing the starving artist, waiting tables at the same time. And that's when everything kind of started for me. It was in my time in Chicago.
What do you think was special about that time in Chicago?
I think, you know, at the time when I started a new job at a restaurant I was working at, one of the girls I met was also interested in channeling, and she was very, very intuitive, and she did tarot, and she said, "You've got to meet my friend." And so a couple days later, I met her friend, and it was Nora Harold. And the three of us would get together a number of times a week, and we would just sit and play. We'd ask questions, and we'd take turns channeling. So it was such an amazing space for me to practice. I got a lot of confirmation very early on that what I was hearing was accurate, because while someone else was channeling, I was hearing the exact same thing in my head. So it was quick, it was fast confirmation. I think that's probably one of the hardest things when it comes to channeling is, we're expecting this big booming voice inside of our heads, and a lot of times it's far more subtle than that. And I was able to kind of hone that very quickly early on.
What did family and friends think of what you were doing at the time?
They're so incredibly supportive. I am so blessed and so lucky to have a family that loves and supports me no matter what I want to do. They were curious. They had lots of questions. My brother, as I said, is very intuitive, and he had his own spiritual path that he kind of explored. And so I got exposure to new things from him as well. He's 3 years older than I am. So he was incredibly supportive, and he's the first person who volunteers to ask questions, and you can channel for me. So it was really wonderful, and so were my friends. I can remember saying to people, I know this sounds completely crazy, but I'm supposed to be doing this thing, and they volunteered. They're like, well, if you are able to, then I'm happy to ask some questions and help you with that. So I think people are generally curious. They want to know what's on the other side, what's their life purpose. So I think we all have this question. So people are really quick to raise their hand to say, I'm happy to help out. So in 2003, I formalized this as a business. I decided that this was something that I wanted to do full time, and it took me a couple of years. It was really part time, and I did some other work on the side. I had worked for a company that purchased 4 hotels, and I had gone to Hong Kong for a bit to help them open an office, and took a little break from the channeling. But when I came back, I helped them to open an office here. So that kind of supplemented my income and allowed me to do this as a full-time job while I was still building things. In the early 2000s, I was doing a lot of expos and events and doing a lot of workshops, just trying to spread the word and get it all out there. And really around 2006, I started doing this full time. It became easier because of the internet. I think that really was the shift when more and more people started getting online and you could find those things and the technology was there. Well, it's been interesting. I think when the guides first started bringing information through, it was really a lot of it very big picture information, kind of a little bit of galactic history, not too much, because they say that it's very fluid. It's depending on which version of history we're looking at. But it was more big picture. They needed to get people to open up and to start thinking outside of their tiny little box. And today it's bringing it back down at a much more personal level so that people, now that they've got the theory, can take it and apply it to their day-to-day reality. So it's back to basics. And, there are a lot of other beings who are showing up, and some that I worked with at the very beginning that I haven't really worked with for a while. They're coming back around again because it's time. So that's been interesting for me to see the progression of that. I worked with the galactic light codes, the language of light, very early on. And then I stopped as the Pleiadians came in. And then a couple years ago, they said it's time to start working with this again. And so that's also shifted. And that's a whole nother level in and of itself. I'm noticing that the energies and the frequencies that are coming in are far more transformative.
Obviously, there's other people, there's so many different channelers that channeling different source connections. Some channeling source or God, some channeling relatives of the past, on whatever it may be, right? So why should we listen to a Pleiadian collective?
Well, I think you need to listen to what resonates. It's not that, there's a specific being that you need to listen to. They're here to support us, to help us to be stewards of the planet, to teach us. The Pleiadian system has a long history of being teachers. They actually align the group that I work with a stellar body rather than a planetary body because they're beings of light. They don't have physical form. And Alcyon is the central sun in the Pleiades, and that's what they align with. And Alcyon is a repository for information. It's a library. So you can think of yourself as being kind of a paperback. All of your experiences are stored within yourself. I mean, we're holographic, and all of that information of the information of the entire universe is stored within you. But some of those records are just more easily accessible. So you're kind of the paperback. And then Mother Earth is storing all the records for all the beings from Earth. And then she's kind of like the branch library. The sun then stores all the records for the solar system. That's the main library. And then Alcyon is the central sun for our galaxy. So all the galactic information is being stored in Alcyon. And so they work with history and records and information. So that's part of why they're coming through and they're bringing through the information that they are. They're helping us to understand who we are, to empower us, not necessarily to get us lost in a story of this is your history, but rather for us to find that by going inside. They're giving us the tools to learn how to access that information ourselves, because if you're not accessing it yourself, then it just feels like it's hearsay or it's something that someone has told you. You're not really experiencing it for yourself, and that's such an important thing to them. And the first thing that they ever taught me was really to use my own discernment. If something doesn't resonate, let it go. It doesn't matter whether they're the source or someone else is the source. What is my truth in this moment? And that's such a huge message from them. So whether you listen to them or you don't listen to them, it doesn't matter to them. Sometimes the information you may not be ready for. You might hear it and you'll think, oh, well, that doesn't resonate with me. But it'll come by again from another source if you need it. And at that time you might say, oh, wait, I've heard this before. And, there's something about it this time. So, take it or leave it. It's up to you.
What's your connection with them?
They're a collective of about 2,600 beings of light. And I am actually an aspect of that group. So this is something that I contracted to do with them before I incarnated. If you went to physically look for them, if you went to go find them, you're not going to find them because they're ninth dimensional. You're looking at a 3D level because that's the level of consciousness that you're holding. So you're not going to find them there. And they actually have the ability to perceive themselves as an individuated consciousness or as part of the collective whole. So they aren't necessarily tied to a location because it's a different construct to their game. So if you're looking at a 3D level at a space, there are multiple levels or layers that exist. There are frequency ranges that exist. And someone could be in what you would consider to be the location, but they're in a different frequency, a different level of consciousness. And so the experience of that reality is going to be different. So their experience of the planet, their experience of the density that they're walking through the planet or how they experience the planet is very different. So you can see down, but you can't necessarily see up. So if you're in 3D, you're not seeing all of these other levels of consciousness or what you would perceive if you were up at that ninth dimensional level. But you can look down if you have an expanded view. It's kind of like what you could see with your camera and what you see with your drone. If you get that height, you can look down and have that bird's eye view, and that's what's happening when you're holding a higher level of consciousness because you have an expanded perspective because you are more connected to source energy.
So with the work that you're doing now then, what's a common theme right now in some of the work you're doing?
A lot of what they're talking about has to do with the basics of manifestation. Really taking us through the process, the subtle nuances. I think most people understand that thoughts create reality, but there's a whole lot more that's in there. And what we expect to create, what's really driving our desires, like helping people to really identify all of that. And also to get out of their head, stop analyzing what's wrong with me. why do I keep creating this and beating themselves up? It's really about shifting frequency. So they've spent a lot of time in the last 2 years just helping people to move to a new frequency. And that's in part what the light language helps to do, rather than get into the analyzation of, what are my programs? What created this? Sometimes going and looking in the trash just that keeps you in the trash. So, that's what they've been working on. The language of light is a universal language that all life understands. It's comprised of light, sound, sacred geometry, and cosmic information. And there are different dialects to the language of light. It's like hearing English as it's spoken in Ireland or in Australia or in the UK or America. We all understand it. There are just different sometimes words that we use or different syntaxes, but it's all pretty understandable. And it's the same thing with this language of light. It's sources language, and we all have an understanding of it. And there are also symbols that can convey this information as well as the word as it's spoken. To me, channeling is really all about reading subtle frequencies. So it's being able to identify a waveform and then translating it through one of the physical senses. So all of us have the ability to do it. It's not just a couple people in the world who have this ability. And to me, it's such an amazing thing, and why I get so excited about teaching people about channeling is because once we learn how to read subtle frequency, it opens up an entire universe of knowledge and information. Because it's like someone teaching you how to read a book as a child. Then you can go to the library and pull out any book that you want to read. And that's what learning to read subtle frequency does for you. So it's just a matter of choosing the frequency that you want to research or you want to access, whether it's a probable reality or whether you want to work with the dearly departed or ETs. These are all different frequencies. So it's just a matter of tuning in like a radio dial to the station that you want to listen to and turning up the volume. And we all do it all the time, but it's so subtle that we often miss that we're actually doing it. And there is a difference. It feels different when we start to observe it. It feels very rich, very full, very multi-level, multi-tiers of that information. And our imagination actually feels pretty flat in comparison. The difference between a medium and a channel, it's really the exact same process. It's just a matter of tuning into a different station. I think we have contracts. I think we have things that we've agreed to do before we incarnate. And I know that for myself, I agreed to work with these specific beings because there was a message, there was an energy that they wanted to bring and share. And there are people who work specifically with those who've departed, and that's what they're doing. They're helping people to heal, to move on. So a lot of that is based on our contracts before we incarnate.
Where would you like to see the progression of your work in the sense of channeling?
It's been amazing to me how people have opened and how channeling and the acceptance of it has changed dramatically in 2 decades. I think even within the last 5 years, I've seen so many more people who are open to the idea of it, who are open to the messages that are coming through. If you don't believe in channeling, it doesn't really matter. Do you resonate with the message? I think that's important for us sometimes. We get too caught up in what's the source of the message as opposed to the message itself. And I think this is where we have to use our discernment. We have to say, is this my truth? Why is this information in front of me? And, what can I do with this? What do I gain by having this in front of me? So, as far as where it's headed, I don't really know. I think this is a preparatory stage for many of us to learn to open up and prepare to communicate with more physical beings. Part of what they're showing me is that people are opening more and more to physical contact, but it is very traumatic. We have so many wounds to heal. Discernment is the first thing that we have to master. It's interesting because I keep getting discernment today. That seems to be the word of the day. But if we're not standing in our own power, when we do encounter these beings, it makes it very, very difficult because we either want to give up our power to them because we think they have a higher truth, a higher knowledge, or we suppress, or we feel that, or we fear we're going to be suppressed. So that's one thing that I think this channeling in some ways prepares us for, because I do think it's coming, certainly within the next decade. I think contact is a game changer because the first question is, how did you get here? What's your energy source? And there are a lot of things being controlled and manipulated on this planet, including energy. So I think when free energy comes along, it's an absolute game changer. And, one of the things that the guides talk about is about control, the manipulation, but that's not going to change until people start taking on personal responsibility for their life and what they want to see created in the world. And I think that's the piece that needs to shift first before we start having more and more contact with some of our celestial friends.
So do you think the UFO community as it is right now, with all the bigwigs in the UFO community, are they embracing channelers like yourself enough to bring your work in with to theirs, or is it too divided?
I think they're kind of two camps when it comes to this. You've got people who are very analytical, who are looking for the facts, and that's great. And then you've got those that are just bringing in the pure information as they're connecting. So, we need to find a way to kind of bridge that gap, because where we're headed with some of these species, telepathy is the way that they communicate. So the skills that the channelers have is going to be very, very important. And also to understand that many of the beings, or the beings that we will want to connect with in the physical realm, are not interested in interfering with our spiritual growth. So they're standing back waiting for us to develop. So some of the teachings that they're giving through the channelings, that's what's helping us to develop, to grow, so that we're at a level of consciousness where we won't feel devastated when they show up, or we won't give up our power, or we won't fear them in the same way. So there's kind of this strange space that I think we're just starting to bridge between the pure science of it and the pure internal work. And I think that's so important, and there's still a little ways to go with that.